It just grew and it grew, and it was nice, and there was a feel-good factor, and that was the good thing about it, actually. The reconnection with the fans, which I thought was great, and then the lower expectations, and it helped England. It really helped England on this World Cup journey. And then suddenly we had a bunch of heroes which were celebrated on the front and the back pages, and I just felt everything changed with that Colombia game and the penalty shootout.
I don't think he's ever forgiven me, really. He said, I can't believe you're jinxing that now, and sure enough, he half empty there was right and half full here was wrong.
Just looked at each other and said, it's not happening, is it? It can't be true. We're utter disbelief that we're 45 minutes away from watching England qualify for a World Cup final.
Welcome to Make Football Great Again, the podcast that's not only your definitive 48-nation roadmap to the 2026 World Cup, but is also taking you behind the velvet rope of the world's biggest sporting event. I'm Harry Brent, and today I'm joined by two men who followed England all the way to the brink of glory, fancy that, at Russia 2018, and who are going to bring us the untold stories of a tournament nobody in England saw coming, quite frankly. John Cross, Andy Dunn, great to have you both on. How are we?
Yeah, really good. Great to be joining you.
Good, thank you.
Fantastic. So Russia 2018 was a bit of a strange World Cup, really, in hindsight, now that we've had a few years to kind of process it. You had Germany, Portugal, Argentina, Spain all going out relatively early. It was the first time VAR was in use. It was the arrival, so to speak, of Kylian Mbappe, certainly on the kind of world stage, the global stage, and arguably was the tournament that secured Luka Modric something of a shock Ballon d'Or win. France, ultimate, eventual winners at the end. They had a sort of squad full of super players. Perhaps not necessarily the world's greatest team that we've ever seen, but certainly a squad full of superstars. Croatia came out of nowhere to reach the final. Belgium nearly came of age, and England, for the first time since 1990, produced a tournament for us all to be proud of. John, we'll start with you. Just how surreal was it covering that tournament? Obviously, particularly the latter stages. England went from relative no-hopers to, like, hang on, flipping heck, we could actually win this thing. What was it like out there at those stages?
Totally surreal is how I'd sum it up most succinctly, because Euro 2016 had been such a disappointment. And yeah, I mean, Gareth Southgate took over, and yeah, I mean, England did quite well in qualifying. There's no doubt about it. But there was certainly it wasn't completely convincing, I have to say. And the preparation was a bit hit and miss. And we're kind of almost going into the unknown a little bit with Russia. And certainly with Gareth Southgate. And it felt a bit of a team, we didn't quite know what to expect. It certainly got goals up front with Harry Kane. But then how are we going to play this one? Because there were some players coming through, and England certainly had a good younger crop of players coming through. But he wasn't quite sure until about his number one goalkeeper until kind of just before the tournament kicked off. Like Jordan Pickford, and thankfully he did. And then you sort of kind of the likes of Ashley Young, Harry Maguire. How would they fare? You're right to say about Jesse Lingard. Jesse Lingard? I mean, it's a bit surreal to look back, and it was a really strange kind of build up. England were in this bizarre base about 45 minutes away from St. Petersburg, a little place called Rapino. I didn't quite, what to expect from Russia, and different cities and a lot of trips and a lot of different places to go to. And I have to say, my expectation was, well, great. If England can kind of get to the quarterfinals, that'll be excellent. And basically, in previous tournaments, we thought quarterfinals would be disappointment. This one would be great, to be honest. And it just grew and it grew, and it was nice, and there was a feel-good factor, but we didn't have too much expectation. And that was the good thing about it, actually. The reconnection with the fans, which I thought was great, and then the lower expectations, and it helped England. It really helped England on this World Cup journey.
Yeah, you mentioned there the kind of connection with the fans. I think one word that perfectly sums up Gareth Southgate's reign in charge of England would be vibes. I know that sometimes is thrown at him as a bit of a kind of insult, all you add is vibes, no tactics. Again, I think, it's both a compliment and an insult, whichever way you want to look at it. But I just wanted to ask, when at that tournament did the kind of vibe shift happen? Because in hindsight, England didn't exactly, cruise through the group stage. They needed a last-minute winner in the opening game against Tunisia. There was, like obviously losing to Belgium in the dead rubber at the end. There was, some, a little bit of kind of uncertainty. What was it that kind of sparked that surge of belief and positivity, which, as we all know, is super rare in England?
Oh, Colombia, absolutely unbelievable. The shootout, basically. England were cruising in that game, in my view, to quite a comfortable win, and then obviously conceded late on. And I think, oh no, here we go again, and it's heading for a shootout. And then all of a sudden, you're kind of thinking, we can't go to another shootout. We're going to lose in the shootout. And then suddenly, you've got the Jordan Henderson, Eric Dyer dynamic. You've got Jordan Pickford throwing out heroics, and you've just got this incredible turn of events. And you're thinking, when England miss a penalty and they're done for, and how did this happen? They were in such control of the game, such an England thing to do. And basically, it's mapping out in front of them. I mean, it was strange, wasn't it? The other thing was about this, and you always try, and England will be doing the same in the USA, you always try and map out that, how do you get there, and what to do, what does it take? England v Belgium. England, Belgium were the really fancied team. England made an absolute host of changes. And I also remember, I think we were in the sort of kind of before that Belgian game, it was a dead rubber by then, please don't get me wrong. But there was so much discussion over what England should do, basically. Should you throw the game in? We were in the same hotel, I think, as the Belgians, and kind of felt very surreal suddenly, because Thierry Henry was with Belgium at that stage. And I remember a bit sort of kind of seeing him, and he was basically really eyes down, focused. He wasn't sort of kind of entertaining in his small talk, and it was a really strange kind of game that England made so many raft of change, almost like a complete new team. Was that deliberate? Well, no, not to lose, but definitely, obviously, a different vibe about it and a different feel. And that then gave them this different path, and you could suddenly see it path opening up. And basically Colombia next, but we knew that was a difficult game. And then if you got past Colombia, I think we vaguely knew that we were kind of most likely to get Sweden, Samara, and basically then the journey was, they couldn't, could they? They couldn't, could they? And they did. And that was the point. But it was that incredible success, because we hadn't won in a shootout, hadn't won a knockout game in the World Cup for so many years, so long. England have been perennial underperformers, disappointments, and, second raters, frankly, completely always, never failing to disappoint the nation. And then suddenly we had a bunch of heroes, which were celebrated on the front and the back pages, and I just felt everything changed with that Colombia game and the penalty shootout and the heroics.
Andy, I want to bring you in here. What was the build-up to the semi-final like? Obviously, I think in hindsight, that Croatia team was probably a little bit better than people realised at the time, certainly in England. But be honest, were you guys sort of making plans for the World Cup final? Were you already thinking of that, or what was the build up like?
No, we're making plans at all. No, we've obviously covered England for too long to do that. But bear in mind, following on from Colombia. By the way, my memory of the England-Colombia game, obviously, John's right. You only remember the save or the penalty that wins it. It was the Eric Dyer penalty that won it. I remember when he hit it, and I thought, how cool are you? That's a great penalty. And we're carried away with it. And I looked at it on a replay, and the goalkeeper probably should have thrown his cap on it. It wasn't the greatest penalty, but it was the greatest moments. But I think we went into the semi-final with more optimism maybe than, would normally go into a big game, because the performance against Sweden in the quarterfinal had been so professional, so accomplished. Unlike the Colombia game, it was actually an early kickoff in a place called Samara, which was only 2,000 miles away, I think, from where we're based in up in Repinio. So I remember getting there was a bit of a pain, but it was a very, very, very accomplished performance. If you remember Harry Maguire scoring the first goal and going back to that game against Colombia again, when you're out there, particularly when you're out there with England and you're away from home for a start off, so you don't get the feeling of what's home. You don't get the feel good factor, and you didn't get, for example, that the picture in the wake of that victory over Colombia of Harry Maguire talking to his then fiance in the stand, sort of had gone viral. And sort of, everyone had picked up on this whole feel-good issue of the players then seeing the families, because you're out there, you're not connected. But that starts to get back. It starts to get back a little bit, even though you are based somewhere as remotely as we were. Your friends and family at home, you're saying, listen, it's going mad back here in England. And then when you win so well against Sweden. Listen, they were expected to win against Sweden, but to do it in the way they did, Maguire, and I think it was Dele Alli then scoring the second goal, never really looked in any danger. So you go into that Croatia game actually with quite a bit of confidence. So yes, you daren't, because for those of us who've covered England for so long, we daren't even dream about covering England in the World Cup final, yet there we were one game away, and then there we were, to take that on a bit, one half away. That's the thing. And obviously, I was sat next to Crossy. We're one up. We've just missed the chance to go possibly two up before half time. But we're one up and we're in control. And I did say, I nudged John and said, I can't believe it, mate. We are, 45 minutes and we're going to be covering England in the Luzhniki Stadium in Moscow in a World Cup final. And I don't think he's ever forgiven me, really. He said, I can't believe you're jinxing that now. And sure enough, he half empty there was right and half full here was wrong.
Oh, it's so true. I always remember going.
I never forget we were sat on the end of the row, John. Sorry we were sat on the end of the row, and I did say to you, if you remember just before half time, it's still a matter of contention whether or not I think Harry Kane could have squared that ball to Raheem Sterling. Would he have been onside? I'm not sure. But basically, we had a chance and insufficient control to think we could have gone into the break even further ahead. But even so, I was convinced then that this was a Croatia team that, with all respect, were good, but they weren't world beaters and that we could see it through. Sadly wrong.
I was just going to say that basically I always remember going for a pee at half time. And basically, just looking across at a sort of a fellow journo, sort of kind of covering England as well, and we just looked at each other and said, "It's not happening, is it? It can't be true." We're utter disbelief that we're 45 minutes away from watching England qualify for a World Cup final. I mean, that would have been the absolute, at that stage, would have been the absolute epitome and the best part of my career.
What was it like after the game? I mean, obviously, huge disappointment internally, but I mean, was there a general sense of, wow, we've achieved so much, or was there a sense that the players were really, really, downtrodden? I mean, obviously they would have been, but do you get my point? That was it a sense of a wow, that's a missed opportunity, or do you know what, we did better than anyone was ever expecting?
No, 100% missed opportunity. Without a doubt. I remember that way into the night. Going back over the game, going back over as you do in any big game like that. So many turning points in the game. What ifs in the game? What have we done this? What have we brought someone on earlier? And I think see, by then, you correct what you said, is the expectations going into the tournament weren't high. But, they listen, I would slightly disagree by saying that with John, by saying when he says that it was absolutely the Colombia game that transformed it. It was transformative. But from the second game of the group stages, listen, we scraped through against Tunisia in the first game. But, scoring 6 in the second game. And I remember the fans there. And I suddenly thought, there is a bit of a feel-good factor about this now. It is building up. I mean, I think what's interesting, Harry, if you look back when you spoke there about Southgate going in, no expectations, essentially, and building up the connectivity with fans. And one of the ways he did that, or one of the ways he tried to do that, is that we, the media, are the conduit to the fans. So basically, they hear from the players through the media. So then we had this, which at first we were all skeptical of a little bit. We're actually going to be, it's not going to be them and us. Like when Southgate was a player, I'm sure he was part of a group that maybe thought it was that the England media were there and were just basically waiting for England to fail so we could lay into them. This was the idea that, actually, you know what? We need a better relationship. We've got to live side by side. Hence why we then go to this remote place. Hence then every morning they come and do their interviews and we do things together. I mean, it was fairly superficial. That's where the darts started. The idea is we'd play darts against a selected member of the media will play darts against the selected England player. And this is supposed to foster relations. I can't remember who John played. I played Harry Kane. I'll just drop that in there. He did beat me. So he did beat me. And I always knew he was a winner because he actually celebrated beating me at darts as though he'd just scored the winner in Moscow in the final. And even though these are small things, which we being cynical sort of went, yeah, really, we sort of half didn't laugh them off. But they did get, it did, in essence, I could see where he was coming from. I'm not saying we were a lot more positive because of that, but we were positive because of the results, but then it did, and again, we're not cheerleaders, but it did give us a sort of, I don't know, a little bit of positive emphasis. And then of course, they played well, which hence, when you get to the time at the end, after the Croatia game, it generally was a feeling that it was a huge missed opportunity because they'd grown into the tournament. Players had grown into the tournament. Individuals had grown into this tournament. And yeah, listen, I'm not saying for 1 minute I thought France were a very good team. I know you said so, maybe not the best ever French team, but they weren't far off it. They were very, very, very good.
Can I give you a little potted history of the darts and the media? And basically, just a little bit of fun. But basically, I do think that I've been fortunate. Andy goes back even further than me. Blimey, he's that much older than me. But basically, in terms of World Cups. But I was in the Mirror office actually for the 98 World Cup. 2002 was my first World Cup, and I've enjoyed it ever since. Absolutely wonderful time. But I do think it was a very different press setup back then. It was a different dynamic. Yeah, Andy's right. I do think sometimes it was pretty vicious. And I think going into 2018, we did have a bit more, how can I put this? A younger, more fun, perhaps, attitude towards it, which was, and I was going to sort of kind of tell this anecdote really. In the build-up, we used to go with a travel agent called BAC, and basically David Pearson. And I always remember he was a bit split because this Rapinoe place was, as I say, 45 minutes outside of St. Petersburg. And there was a discussion whether we should stay in Rapinoe, which was very quiet, one-horse town, and that horse had left, several years ago, one restaurant, one bar, and that's about it. And basically, or St. Petersburg, which is a phenomenal, fun city, great for nights out. And it became known as the beers v bikes vote. So basically, the people like me who quite like a night out and a few beers basically wanted to stay in St. Petersburg. The bike brigade basically wanted to bring, I kid you not, their racing bikes to Russia so that they could go around the forest of Rapinoe and get fit every day. I mean, please, come on. What's the world coming to? Really? And anyway, so unfortunately, the bikes won. And so basically, outvoted the party boys like me and Andy. And basically, we're very serious when we hit our laptops, by the way. But basically, so that's the kind of the setup. But so we liked a bit of a laugh. Even the Bikes boys did, to be fair. And but I've got to say, covering Euro 2016 was the piss. Basically, it was a really silly atmosphere set by, I don't know, Roy Hodgson, lovely fella. The dynamic wasn't working. Ray Lewington, Gary Neville. It was all, it was a bit weird. And basically, to such a point that one day when we were talking to Joe Hart, he let slip that they'd been playing darts. We asked him about the darts, who was good at darts. And do you know what? There was a ban on talking about the darts. And Joe Hart wouldn't talk about the darts. And it became a thing to such a point that when we lost to Iceland, my dear great friend Charlie Sale spotted Joe Hart coming through the mix zone where you stop the players for interview, chased him down the mix zone and said, "Yeah, but Joe, who won the darts?" And honestly, it was comical. So to break down that stupid barrier, Gareth Southgate basically thought, so let's have a giggle and basically put the journos up against the players in the darts. It was a symbol of kind of new relations, basically. Let me tell you, I disgraced myself at darts. I was so bad. I was quite nervous. I'm quite a sort of a loud person in the group sometimes, so I can't let myself down. I was up against John Stones, and basically
got a long reach.
Practicing. I kind of threw a dart which narrowly missed a double, and then from then on I thought, oh crikey, because it had just gone outside, and I went to pot. And I missed the board completely with my next two. And I scored a grand total of 0. And basically, when we then went down to sit next to John Stones and speak to him afterwards, I was thinking, oh, God. And he was laughing, basically, like, and I can't believe that just happened sort of fashion. I even saw him at the Club World Cup last summer. And I he was laughing when I showed up because, so used to sort of seeing me on England duty and whatever. And, had many a sort of a giggle and stuff. Top bloke. But it was just so symbolic of a new relationship, a new world order. And basically it was fun again. And that was the thing. And hopefully that resonated from the press room to the kind of the column inches, to the coverage, and the fans could appreciate that this lot weren't taking themselves so seriously.
No.
And actually, it was that to me was a big part of why it worked.
I remember, John, if I could just come in there, I can remember also. So the players, listen, the players had nothing much to do anyway. This place repping, it was population 2,000. There literally was not a massive amount to do. Obviously, it was so north. It was actually on the Gulf of Finland. There actually was a day, I think it was probably June 23rd, 4th, whatever, when there was actually only, I think it was 3 minutes of darkness. Literally, I think it was 23 hours, 57 minutes of daylight. A couple of the lads were in a bar that night, went outside, I think, just for a bit of fresh air before midnight. Went outside, and did whatever, and then came back in, and it'd gone dark and then light again by the time they come back in. So the players had a lot of time in their hands. But just one quick one, just following from that, the players came in for their interviews. John says, he sat around with John Stones, and they'd hang around a bit. There was a pool table, there was darts, and that's where. So Jamie Vardy, who wasn't getting much of a look in the team, he was just hanging around basically, just killing time. And we were interviewing Harry Maguire, and Jamie Vardy then sort of pretended or sort of a mock saying, "Hi, I'd just like it's Jamie Vardy from the Vardy Express. Can I ask a question, Harry?" Yes. And why did they call you Slabhead? And that was where. That was the moment that everyone then got to know. So, of course, he's like, "I can't believe you said that." And, of course, we put it in the newspapers, and then the nickname was exposed. So it was that sort of... and it did work, didn't it, John, to a certain extent? Yeah. And, of course, hey, listen, if they'd have been playing poorly and getting beaten, it would have been different. But it had that sort of... Which is, again, because we built up the start, that was essentially the sort of start of a really good relationship with Gareth Southgate and his staff and the FA and, to a certain extent, the players. That's what gave the defeat the eventual defeat to Croatia, that's what made it even more tough to take. There's no getting away from that. We fell for those lads. We fell for Gareth Southgate. We could see what it meant to them, and that's what made it even more painful to go out then.
Just to get a little bit more of a feel of, precisely what it was like being in Russia for, as a journalist. I'm just going to fire a few quick fire questions. I guess you can both give an answer to this, or we can do it one by one. Maybe we'll give you the opportunity to both give an answer. Don't have to necessarily, give me quick fire answers. Take as little or as long as you like. There are no rules here. But I just want to know, what was the best thing about Russia 2018? John, we'll start with you.
Oh, Russia 2018 as a tournament as a whole, it breaks my heart that in all likelihood we'll never go back to Russia. Certainly not for the foreseeable. What an amazing country and what an amazing experience. I mean, I've been lucky enough to go to Moscow, Red Square, and even Lenin's tomb. Sort of, it's an amazing country. The difference in the cities, and some of the history. I'm obsessed by kind of Second World War history, and I love it. And sort of kind of going to Volgograd, which used to be Stalingrad, and seeing those sort of kind of memories, and it was just everything about it, and the different sort of kind of set up in culture, and it was a completely different world. I found it fascinating. I absolutely loved it. What an experience.
To be in a country, of course, we'll talk about the other World Cups at some other stage, but where you were having to go so far, you understood just a little bit more about the vastness of Russia, which of course then translates into the worst thing, which was the logistics. And the logistics were tortuous at times. I think there was some sponsorship commercial limitation where essentially a lot of the time you had to fly through Moscow. That was essentially it. So you had to, even if it wasn't actually the quickest way, you had to go through Moscow and through the airlines there. And that was the worst thing. Logistically, it was a challenge, and particularly as we were up pretty much in Finland. I mean, if anyone knows the geography, Rapino is the very technical geography. Rapino is right up in the north, and it's literally opposite. It's on the Gulf of Finland. Finland is opposite it. So the logistics were a challenge. But I'm with John. It was like, the actual, and I think a lot of our fears in terms of organisation, in terms of heavy-handed policing, for example, which was one thing that was a fear ahead, didn't materialise. It was a great atmosphere there, good atmosphere with English fans, and it was good atmosphere, friends, family. So yeah, the worst thing to logistics, without a doubt.
Yeah, and I think, and John, I'm guessing you'd echo that in terms of, I was going to ask, what the worst thing was. It sounds like just the vastness, the logistics, all that sort of side of it was causing the biggest problems.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, Andy's right, really. I think sort of the travel agent had to deal with Aeroflot, basically. So it was in behest to them. And basically every flight had to be via Moscow. I mean, it was just ludicrous. The travel was crazy, absolutely crazy. Never seen anything like it. And that challenge was most definitely the worst bit. It was. And then the other thing was a bit. Even when we moved, we then had this challenge when we did have a night out in St. Petersburg, and actually then we later moved closer to St. Petersburg, sort of kind of, for a bit more of the tournament later on. And we stayed, and this was also the case for Rapino, we stayed in a place where at a certain time of night, they would shut the bridge which connected one part of St. Petersburg to the other. And basically it was utterly bizarre. And if you didn't make it back over that bridge by a certain time, you had to go like a ridiculous detour to kind of get back. And it was almost, you felt like Cinderella going to the ball. You had to be back in time for midnight. Otherwise the glass slip would suddenly disintegrate. And we had some I felt like one time we're sort of in this cab and he was almost racing to, as the bridge was going up, he was almost racing across the bridge as it began to go up. And it was just crazy. Not that we're always out in the town, I hasten to add, but I'm sure that people will appreciate you're 6 weeks away from home, that you are allowed the odd night out and a couple of beers along the way. But it was quite amusing. It was a bit of a challenge, and on one of those nights we did also maybe leave the person we should remain nameless really on this, but we had one night out where basically we were struggling to kind of get a message across what we were trying to order, and this guy, one of our Scottish brethren, walks in and basically sort of says, "Don't worry, lads, I've got this. I can speak a bit of Russian." I said, can you order the white wine to go with this fish or whatever? So he goes, "No problem at all." And he literally says, "Can I have a white wine ski, please?" And he does it so seriously that he absolutely meant it. He wasn't taking the mickey. A piece of fish and a white wine ski. I mean, unbelievable.
And just briefly going back to England, who in your mind was England's most important player at that World Cup? Not necessarily the best player or the best performing player, but just without whom England would not have got as far as they did.
I mentioned him before with the photograph. I think, I say not necessarily the best, but Harry Maguire was magnificent at that World Cup. It was the World Cup where he announced himself. It was the World Cup. He was, listen, you looked at him and his journey, you forget his journey. His journey wasn't through the gilded academies of Premier League football. His journey was from playing, locally initially. And there was just something about him that, was fantastic. Something about him that you related to, I think that everyone related to back home. And he played very, very, very well. And again, the header that he scored to put us ahead against Sweden, it was just a great moment. And to me, he barely put a foot wrong in that tournament. And I genuinely think I would have him. Listen, there were plenty of other contenders, but for me, I think he summed up everything about that squad, which was pretty honest, pretty hardworking. You could relate to them, and they gave it pretty much everything.
What about you, John?
Yeah, no, I was going to say Maguire actually. So Andy's stolen that one for me, but I tell you what, I think Maguire sort of absolutely epitomised the unexpected nature of it. But to be slightly different, I will, and I know it's an obvious one, Harry Kane. I mean, it's just goals, and to win the Golden Boot was just a phenomenal achievement. I do think it elevated him to another level, and basically went from being prolific for Tottenham, decent Premier League striker, onto the world stage, onto the global stage. And I think that he was just phenomenal. What a leader, leads by example. I just think a fabulous. I think that tournament established him on the world stage. It established him as a England great in waiting, which he's proved to be, and one of the England greatest players of all time.
And which England player surprised you the most, John?
Well, it's a bit left field, but I've had to look it up and basically remind myself just what an instrumental part of it he was Ashley Young. Because basically, England obviously played the wing-back system with back three, and Ashley Young was just so, reliable, and we were having to sort of kind of debate who might work and who did, sort of kind of, who did. But Ashley Young was an integral part of that team. And I think when people look back, they might just forget his importance to the team, to the system. He also, I felt as if we got to know him a little bit better, and basically just became a quite an integral part of that team and sort of kind of that tournament for England. A bit of it was just a very pleasant and nice surprise on that one.
I heard a hum of approval from you, Andy. Can I assume that you agree with John's take there?
Yeah. Who emerged, that Ashley Young was. It's funny, John saying there about how we got to know him a little bit better. I don't think we'd always had the best relationship, or he hadn't always had a good relationship with the media. But I remember talking to him after one game, and John will remember that, down in the bowels of the stadium, and he was very, very, very interesting character. And there was others in that same boat. I remember having a good chat with Fabian Delph, who wasn't obviously part of the first, was part of the squad, but not obviously an automatic choice in the team. And I remember being, fascinated by his views on it and by the whole squad. My surprise, I wouldn't say the player who surprised most for me, Ashley Young, I agree. That's why there was the hum of approval. But also, I thought Kieran Trippier, slightly more obvious, but I thought that was, again, a tournament when he announced himself as an elite player. Obviously scoring a goal in the semi-final, but also, he all the way through the tournament, I thought he brought something, a little bit of stability to the team. And I thought he'd struggle a bit after the move from Burnley to Spurs. And then that again was a tournament he announced himself. So yeah, Trippier for me was maybe the unsung hero. But I agree. I wouldn't disagree with John about Ashley Young either.
Lovely. And lastly, if England had beaten Croatia in that semi-final, what's the score against France in the final?
France would have won 3-1. I just think that France, as they displayed against Croatia in the final, were a different level to anyone else in that last four, if you like. I feel as if, yeah, they were. I know you sort of kind of in the intro sort of saying about hadn't quite reached their peak. I feel as if there was a lot of quality there. I think we overlook, Pogba. That was Pogba's shining moment, defining moment. Strutting through the midfield. I'm a big Pogba fan. The first time Mbappe, the unsung hero, non-scoring hero, Olivier Giroud, there was a lot of quality there. I do feel as if they were, very, in my view, very worthy winners, and basically I'd love to have gone to the final. Please don't get me wrong, but I do think that they would have been too good for England. Maybe it was a miracle. Maybe we might have overcome them. But I seem to remember we played them about a year later in a friendly. My word, they were a very, very good side. And basically, I think they would have overcome us and been far too good for us. But a good team.
Andy?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We were both at the final, myself and John. They played very well. It was a, you could argue a tour de force from Paul Pogba. There were players with which we were very familiar, but there were players in the prime, from Hugo Lloris through to Raphael Varane, Paul Pogba, N'Golo Kante, Antoine Griezmann at his best. They were just, and obviously Kylian Mbappe, a young version of Kylian Mbappe. So exciting. I think it would have been, listen, obviously it goes without saying it's an old cliche and anything could happen in a one-off game. And we've seen it before in big games like that. But really, 9 times out of 10, they are beating that French team. 9 times out of 10, I would suggest, is beating that England team. So it would have been maybe a 1 in 10 chance of England winning that World Cup final had they got through. That was a good France team. It really was.
Yeah, and even scarier to think they were without Karim Benzema, who, in another universe could well have been in that team as well, to make him even more scary than they were. Well, thank you, gentlemen, very much. That's it for our trip back to Russia 2018. Tune in again for more untold stories from the FIFA World Cup and for the launch of our gigantic preview for the 2026 World Cup, where we'll be sitting down with a representative from every single nation heading to the tournament this summer. Our World Cup coverage doesn't stop there either. For all the latest news out of the tournament, you can keep up to date by following Mirror Football on social media or by visiting www.mirror.co.uk/football. And also don't forget to subscribe to Make Football Great Again. We're on YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Please leave a comment to join the conversation with myself, Harry Brent, as well as John Cross, Andy Dunn, and Jeremy Cross. We'll see you next time. Let's make football great again.